And Debbie's going to kick us off.
Hi, everybody, and welcome from the Friends of the Public Bank and the local Clean Energy Alliance. We're delighted to be putting on this program. We have wonderful speakers. We just want to say a couple of short things before we have our wonderful opening ceremony. But I wanted to say that Councilmember Kalb is Oakland's representative to the East Bay Community Energy, so this crosses two of his many interests. The Friends of the Public Bank want to thank particularly Councilmembers Kaplan and Kalb, but also the whole Oakland City Council for approving our feasibility study less than a week ago, which means Oakland is on the road to public banking. And the people doing the feasibility study, which I can actually say, you have no idea how weird it is to be on this side of the chambers. The people doing the feasibility study are Global Investment Corporation, which is a group that we have the highest confidence in, and we're really excited to see what they come up with when they really dig in to what it means to have a public bank for Oakland. And with that, I'd like to introduce Penny Opal Plant. We're very honored that she's going to do an opening ceremony for us. Where would you like to be? Here?
Where do you want me to be?
Right there.
Okay. Can you hear me? I want to say that I agree with you that it's very interesting to be on this side of this room. So just a brief introduction. My name is Penny Opal Plant. My family has been in the Richmond area since the 1930s. I'm Yaqui and Mexican on my mother's side, and Choctaw, Cherokee, and European on my father's side. I'm a co-founder of Idle No More SF Bay and one of the signatories on the Indigenous Women of the Americas Defending Mother Earth Treaty. So I've been asked to open up this important event this evening, and I want to pay my respects to everyone else sitting on this side of the counter who is, I'm sure you're all very accustomed to being on this side of the counter. So I just want to begin with thanking the Creator, great mystery, whatever that being is that you refer to, that created everything that we see and everything that we don't see. I want to thank the grandmas and grandpas that guide over us and protect us and take care of us in the east, in the south, in the west, and in the north, also above and below. I call on them a lot to help me figure out which direction we're to go in. Because as we know, our human family has not done a very good job of maintaining this sacred system of life. I also want to thank the spirits of the Ohlone people who still reside here and on whose land we are occupying. And my friends who are Ohlone, I ask that the Creator blesses them with everything that they need to keep their shell mounds protected and their sacred sites secret so that they are not destroyed like everything else has been destroyed on their territory. I would like to thank all the people that went to Standing Rock to stand strong for the water, the air, and the soil, and for future generations, including Rebecca Kaplan. And I think that that's part of how this whole public banking concept was really lifted up, was at Standing Rock. Standing Rock provided the thread and the needle so that we could start stitching together what happens when these corporate financial institutions have so forgotten how to be a real human being, the people in those institutions, that they fund projects that will hurt their own children and grandchildren. So I thank each and every one of you for being here. And I just want to remind all of us that the time for negotiating what we want is over. It is way too late for us to ask for something that we want. At this point in time, We need to demand what it is that we need. Because if we don't all gather our courage up and do the things that maybe we're uncomfortable doing, then not only are we going to live in a kind of hell if we're alive in the next 30 years or so, but our grandchildren, and my grandson's here in the audience, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and all of the children of our non-human relatives will definitely be living in something very similar to hell. And I don't believe that the Creator gave us this gift for us to destroy it. So it's our responsibility and it's our sacred duty to stand up for this sacred system of life. So I thank you all for inviting me. I pray that you all have that kind of courage to make sure that everything is going to be safe 500 years from now, and that we reimagine what this future can be as we move through the eye of this needle. Thank you.
Oh.
And now, Councilmember Rebecca Kaplan will take it from here. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Okay, we're going to do that one more time. Welcome to Oakland. So when I say good evening, then you're all going to say good evening, okay? Good evening. Good evening. Awesome. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much to all of the sponsors and the panelists. Thank you so much, Penny Opal Plant, for opening for us and helping us remember what is important, and to keep in mind, as we're talking tonight about the overlap between the issues of public banking and clean energy, the degree to which these things are intertwined, and the degree to which we have a duty to protect the water and the land and humanity from acts of destruction. And that too is part of what we're here for. My name is Rebecca Kaplan. I serve as the Oakland City Council member at large, so I represent the entirety of this fabulous city of Oakland. I also have some other hats besides this one, which is that I'm now also on the board of the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, where we are also fighting to clean up the truck pollution and the ship pollution and the rail pollution and all the other sources that are harming communities, primarily in West and East Oakland, as they have been for many years now, and we're fighting to clean that up as well. Also, if you've seen the new Broadway shuttle buses with the blue thing that says "Spare the Air" on them, going up and down Broadway, free bus, that is funded by the Air District. So another successful project here. And, you know, I wanted to bring us into what we're doing tonight, and thank you for the reminder about the conversation at Standing Rock, because yes, 10,000 people illegally encamped in the cold, facing police brutality. We're talking about public banking, among other things, in addition to fighting for indigenous rights and for the water. We're also talking about the problem that all of these grassroots movements to try to get the big corporate banks to stop investing in destructive, evil things feel like such an uphill battle, that we want options for where to put our money that is different from that we don't want to participate in banks that fund the destruction of communities or the destruction of the earth, and that is yet another good reason to work for a public bank. Also, you know, we are facing this recent season of environmental reminders that we reap what we sow, and that if we allow the continuation of the pollution and the destruction, that will continue to come back. And let us not let the people of Puerto Rico or the Virgin Islands be forgotten. As you know, there's not electricity there, so there's not getting a lot of press coverage of the millions of people who don't have water or food or electricity or access to medical care right now. And so facing all these storms and droughts and floods, we need to build a more sustainable world. We need to be using energy that is positive for the environment and for the community. We need to do it in a way that creates and supports local jobs. And we need banking institutions that fund projects that help people. We need banking institutions that don't redline our communities and discriminate and deny people access to loans, access to mortgages, access to business startup, and a bank that can help save money for the public by providing cheaper ways to fund public projects. And of course, in Oakland, important also to mention that we have this ridiculous situation where one of our large and growing industries is not allowed access to the banks. And that is our cannabis industry, and thank you everyone from the cannabis industry who's been helping advocate for this effort. And they don't have access to banking, which causes further risk of crime and is just a bad idea of how to run things. So a public bank that would serve the community, that would provide equality in terms of loan giving and ensure that all communities have access and that we can save money, are all really important things to do, and I'm really grateful to be having this forum, and thank you everybody for sitting with us up here, and glad to have some of the Friends of Public Bank up here because they've spent so many meetings speaking from there, urging the council to vote yes on this measure, which Dan Kalb and I have been bringing for, is it a year now? Almost a year, and so it passed last week, so thank you everybody for coming and being a part of it. Yeah, give yourselves a round of applause. Because that was a lot of effort, and now the public bank feasibility study will go forward, and we're grateful to the city of Berkeley, who has put money into it, and to the city of Richmond that is working on that, as well as is Alameda County, and we believe several others will soon follow. So we're building a regional collaboration even as we move forward. So thank you to everyone who's been involved in that. And that brings me to my colleague, Councilmember Dan Kalb, co-author, who's been working on these issues for some time. I want to give him a chance to say hello and share a few words.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all for being here, and thank you also to our panelists for sharing their words and thoughts of wisdom. With all the, I can't even think of the best word, if I probably can't even say the best word, with all the stuff happening in Washington, D.C. these days, it's so important and so heartening to know that we here in Oakland and in much of the East Bay and other parts of our good state are not letting that get us down, but we're fighting back. Whether it's making phone calls to defend the Affordable Care Act or initiating positive, proactive policies such as exploring and moving forward on a public bank and on clean energy and a number of other policy areas here in California. We know that we're doing the right thing in California, in Oakland, in the East Bay, and that we should continue to push back and do what we know is best for all of us, regardless of the backwards happenings in the other side of the country. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm very glad this is moving forward. As you heard earlier, I'm the vice chair of the relatively new East Bay Community Energy Joint Powers Authority, a community choice energy entity here we have in Alameda County, which is also very exciting, and you'll hear more about it from one of our panelists, or one or more of our panelists. This is an opportunity for us to help promote cleaner energy locally for all ratepayers and all electricity users throughout the county. And it's happening not just in Alameda County, but in many places in the state. And I think we'll see it grow more and more. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to move to the side there, not get in the way of the panelists. But thank you all for being here. And we have a lot of work to do after this. And I know you'll all be there with us to make sure that happens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan Kalb. And that brings us to our panelists. Our first panelist is Wolfram Morales, who plays many roles in the East German Savings Bank Association. He is head of the Office of the Executive President, responsible for international relations, press officer, member of the Council of Economic Advisors, and chief economist. Excellent. And is solving the opioid epidemic. No, just kidding, that's not in here. He holds a diploma in economics from the University of Economics Berlin and was also educated in Cuba and Panama. He is trilingual in German, German, Spanish, and English, and we're very happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me here. I heard that all of you are speaking German, so I can continue in German with no problem. Unfortunately, English is the language that I speak worst. Spanish and German are my both natural languages. But I will try to comment you what we are doing in Germany with what we call the energy transition. And what is the role of the public banks that we have in Germany since around about 200 years? For me, it is very impressive to see what you are doing here to fight to have a public bank, because in following my information about the United States, I knew that you have only one public bank, and this is the Bank of North Dakota. And I had the opportunity to visit this bank twice in the last years, and it is exactly or nearly exactly that kind of bank that we have in Germany too. Speaking about our energy transition, I have to comment in 2 minutes what is the role of the policy, because the role of the policy of the federal government of Germany is a decisive one. We have a policy of so-called energy transition. The German word is Energiewende, but the English translation is energy transition. And this is nearly what you know from the Paris Climate Accord. The national targets set for reaching the German energy transition are based on the federal government's long-term strategy for future energy supply, according to which at least 60% of final energy consumption and 80% of electricity consumption ought to be covered with renewable energy by the year 2050. And now I have to see next slide, please, so that you can see the numbers. In combination with the energy efficiency targets, the greenhouse gas emissions are to be cut by 80 to 95% in relation to 1990. So the central element of this transition is the restructuring of the energy sector in Germany. Since 2000, we follow a policy to strengthen the role of renewable energy. Today, we have almost round about 38% of our electricity from renewable energy. And last week, I had a discussion with the head of one of our institutions that are working in this area in the scientific way, and he said to me that this 38% are the whole production, but when we subtract the exports and we only count what is consumed, produced and consumed inside the country, our renewable energy share in the whole energy production is 41%. This is quite good. That's not the best in Europe, as I know the Norwegians has round about 100% or so, but because of all the water power they have. But for a country like Germany, this is a very good number. Next slide, please. You see, oh, I have this 3 times here. Okay. For all that, we need huge investments. Following our calculations for the years 2000 to 2050, these are round about 750 billion euro. 1 euro is approximately $1.20, only for information if you are not familiar with that. And so that we have to invest each year 15 billion euro, what at the moment is 0.5% of the gross domestic product of Germany. I made a calculation to extrapolate this to the United States, and for the United States, 0.5% of the GDP is round about 93 billion each year. I have no idea how much you invest in the US every year, but this is only for information. Next slide, please. The question is where the money comes from. 50 billion euro is a lot of money, and where that comes from. We have different sources. First, the public development banks and other public banks. This is our public bank sector. Second, we have the government with subsidies and tax relief policies. Here you have to know that in following our legislation, we have a Renewable Energy Sources Act in Germany since the year 2000, and this provided, or this had a rule that it is possible to provide a feed-in tariff scheme enabling any company, and the next point is more interesting than to say any company, to enable any individual who meets the technical and legal requirements to sell renewable electricity into the power grid for a guaranteed long-term price for each kilowatt hour. To give you an example, if you put a solar panel on the roof of your house today in Germany, the state will guarantee you what each kilowatt hour, if you sell the kilowatt to the public grid for 20 years. So you can calculate for the next 20 years with your income from that electricity. The operators, in this case, sell the green electricity at the power exchange and, of course, try to get as much money as possible. However, the stock exchange electricity prices are mainly or generally far below the amount promised to the solar plant operators by the law. So there is a difference, and the difference between the stock market price for electricity and the feed-in tariff guaranteed by the government is paid by the government, and the government is refunded by a renewable energy surcharge for the consumers. Every consumer has to pay on his bill a surcharge for renewable energy. At this moment, these are 6.88 cents per kilowatt hour. 6.88 cents are around about 8 cents of a dollar, what you have to pay for every kilowatt hour. Next, we have, no, not next chart, next point in my word, thanks. We have, of course, private investors too. And what I explain with our legal system and with the state guaranteed price for your electricity is very interesting for lots of individuals. I met a colleague last week in Berlin by accident. We are talking about renewable energy because he has a client, and this client is constructing some plants in Cuba. But we discussed about her personal view to this, and he told to me that he has rented the roof of the school of his son, and he put a solar plant on the roof of the school of his son and had a guarantee for the next 20 years. That is first a good business for the family, and second, it is a good business for the school because of the rent. And it is a good business for the society because of the production of renewable energy. Next slide, please. Most of the of the money is coming from public banks. You have to know that we have different types of public banks in Germany. First, 17 development banks at the state level. These are mostly state-owned banks. Then we have 2 federal development banks or institutions at the federal level. These both are the most important from this development banks. And 9 special task banks that are playing a minor role in this context. The development banks are not competing with other banks. These banks are a kind of bankers' banks. They are helping banks when they need some partner to make a loan, for example, in the renewable energy sector. And these development banks, these banks have the best rating possible. This is a AAA rating because these banks are state-owned. They have the same rating like the Federal Republic of Germany. They can fund or raise money in the international financial markets for very good conditions, so that the interests are very low. Of the loans from our development banks have the lowest interest rates in Germany. In this moment, round about 1%, 1.1% or so in this level. And in addition, these banks are responsible to distribute the money that is coming from the government as subsidies for renewable energies. Every bank can deal with these development banks. The second part of the public banks in Germany are the 400 Sparkassen, as we called it. The translation of Sparkasse is savings bank, but the real name is Sparkasse. We have 400 of these banks. Normally, in each county of Germany, you have one Sparkasse, and the business area of the Sparkasse is restricted to this county, so that the Sparkasse has a governance to serve the county and only the county, and not do business in another part, nor in the neighboring county, nor outside of Germany or wherever. It is forbidden to do business outside the county. So a Sparkasse has its own incentive to develop the region the region, this county, to develop this area of business, because if they doesn't, they make no business, because that's the only way to make business as a bank when you are restricted in the business area. We have 7 so-called Landesbanken. These are central banks of the Sparkassen. This is a very close relationship. We are working into a network of 600 different financial institutions, 400 Sparkassen, 7 Landesbanken, and 173 or more other institutions in this context. The main tasks for these public banks that are operating on the normal market, competing with private banks and competing with cooperative banks, is to promote the economic development of the area. And to give you some numbers, our Sparkassen total of loans is in this moment 1,400 billion euro. This is a huge amount, and this is revolving. And it is increasing from year to year. Our development banks has around 140 billion euro in lower interest loans, and both combined are able to finance the renewable energy revolution in Germany. Next, please. Here you see some lending conditions of the KfW W is the name of one of our development banks at the federal level. So this bank is financing every renewable energy project that you have up to 50 million euro, and with an effective interest rate from 1.1% per year if you have the best creditworthiness. And in some cases, that depends from your special investment. You can get some subsidies from the state in addition to this 1.1%, so that the sum that you have to repay go down. And the period, the credit period, is up to 20 years. The interest rate are a fixed rate at maturity, and you have a grace period up to 3 years. I compared it with what is possible in the area of the commercial banks. The best commercial bank that I found is making such loans at 1.51, but the most of the commercial banks is beginning with 2% and going with 3.5, and all this for the best credit worthiness. That means that all the projects are projects from persons with the best credit worthiness, it is normal to have some interest rates from 5 to 8% on average. Next, please. Thank you. Our group, the Sparkassen group, the 400 Sparkassen over the past 5 years has financed in that way 250,000 investments in the energy sector, partly using the KfW Development Bank and his special loans, and 210,000 projects on energy efficiency and construction, 4,000 projects to increase energy efficiency in companies. And so this is not what we say about us, but this is what the government is saying about us. The Sparkassen Finance Group is one of the largest sponsors of the energy transition in our country. Next, please. This is a little bit hard to understand. That's why I explain the numbers. We have what you see in purple. We have had in the year 2016 total energy, renewable energy investments in Germany as a whole of 14.2 billion euro. And now where the money is coming from, with some additional informations in blue. The purple is all the renewable energy, and the rest is the additional information. The development bank, KfW, has an environmental and climate program of round about 35 billion euro in that year. The environmental program that is a part of the environmental and climate protection program is a program of round about 9.5 billion euro, and the renewable energy program into that environmental program has 4.7 billion. Unfortunately, the 16 public development banks in the States don't provide figures about their business, at least to the public or to us, so I'm not able to mention these figures, but by the way, they are not so important in the finance of renewable energy like all the others that you see here. The second largest on the federal level is the Rentenbank, and this bank has done loans of nearly 2 billion euro last year. Our group, Sparkassen and Landesbanken, had done for energy efficiency in housing loans for 18.1 billion, and for energy efficiency and renewable energy 3.7 billion. So that when we sum all this and we take into account only what has made or what were made for renewable energy, then we had 10.3 billion euro. That means 10.3 billion euro from 14.2 billion euro in Germany as a whole, that we finance around about 73% of the investments in renewable energy in our country. Next, please. And here, what you see here, that is the net installed electricity generation capacity in Germany. On the top, the solar energy, the development from 2002 to 2017. You see that the solar energy has increased a lot. Then the second is the wind energy. And after the wind energy, what is here in orange? Do you see? Yes, this is orange. What you see in orange and in dark brown and in the normal brown, these are the conventional energies. Red, this is nuclear energy. You see a jump from the year 2010 to the year 2011. That was when Fukushima happens, and our government decided to opt out of the nuclear of the production of nuclear energy. And green and blue, this is biomass in green, and blue, this is water, energy from water. And we have installed a capacity of around about 200 gigawatts. That means that we are able to produce in any second of the day 200 gigawatt if needed. But the problem is that with some of the renewables, for example, solar energy or wind energy, you need sun or you need wind. And that's why we cannot produce solar electricity at night, or we cannot produce wind electricity when the wind isn't blowing. We have the capacity to produce 108 gigawatts in the best conditions. As I said, at the moment we have 41% of our electricity coming from renewable sources because of these changes and the problems of the sun and the wind and so on. Next, please. Here you can see this a chart. This is last week. And you see in the last week we had a lot of sun. A lot of sun means in Germany from 10 to 3 p.m. 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. We had in the first days, we had some wind. In the last, at the weekend, we had not so much wind, and so we had not so much production of electricity. What I heard from the professor that I comment some minutes ago is that we are able to produce 1,000 full load hours of solar energy and 2,000 full load hours wind energy per year. But what we need per year are 8,760, because a year have 8,760 hours, and you have to produce electricity at any time. So that we are on a good way, but we have to do a lot more. The same with the problem with greenhouse gases. We have some predictions that if the government doesn't enforce more the renewable energy, we may fail our own goals to reduce greenhouse gases, and so that is not so easy even in our country, but we are on a good way. And press please on this blue link. Okay, and when you scroll a little, you see this is the production of yesterday and today. What you see in the line, the purple line, this is what we consume in energy, and the rest is the production. You see the sun in yellow. The yellow is and the blue is water, wind, or onshore and offshore wind. And the green is our biomass, energy produced with biomass. You see here that, the conventional energy, this is the black one. You see that the most energy is coming from the black one, at least in the last 2 days. And that's why we need some conventional energy plants for a while in the next years, at least up to the year 2040, 2050. But this only as additional information. If you have any questions in the discussion, I think I can answer to that. This only as introduction for you about the situation. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you. That is incredibly inspiring. And by the way, we will take questions at the end after all the panelists. So if you think of questions, feel free to note them down or something. We will have a time for questions afterwards. But it's both inspiring of how much has been done, but even with how much has been done, to know we've got a lot left to do. So, and of course, in California, the sun does shine more hours than that. So if we installed as many electric panels as they had, we'd actually get more solar electricity.
This is exactly my idea. You are in a better condition than we with sun, and I think even with water in the United States.
Awesome. So it's not hopeless. Okay, and thank you for being here. Our next speaker is Nick, who's going to now tell me if I'm mispronouncing your last name. Is it Chaset or Chaset?
Chaset.
Chaset, Nick Chaset, thank you very much. I was giving it a little French pronunciation. Nick was appointed to the position of Chief Executive Officer for the soon-to-launch East Bay Community Energy Program in August. Prior to his new role, he was Chief of Staff for Michael Picker, President of California's Public Utilities Commission. Mr. Chaset also previously served as Governor Jerry Brown's Special Advisor for Distributed Energy Resources, focusing on the development and implementation of distributed generation, combined heat and power, and energy storage policy. Oh, good. That's part of what we need because sometimes the sun doesn't shine. Before entering state service, he was the Director of New Market Development and Government Affairs of Q-Cells NA. He received his BA in International Relations at Tufts University and his MBA from Georgetown. And of course, I have to give the shout out that I did my master's in Urban and Environmental Policy at Tufts, so both there. An MBA from Georgetown University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Q-Cells is a German... I was going to say Q-Cells, a German solar company, great beneficiary of KfW bank loans for solar projects that they've developed in Germany, and actually a project I worked on in Canada was partially funded by the KfW. So well, thank you all for joining me here today, and thank you for the invitation. I figured I would talk a little bit about East Bay Community Energy, what we're up to in our early days of getting ready to launch, and maybe reflect on some of the opportunities for East Bay Community Energy to work with a public bank and local financial institutions. So East Bay Community Energy is the and will be the community choice aggregator that serves Alameda County. So unless you live in Pleasanton or Newark, hopefully next year at some point you will be one of our customers. I'm really trying to focus away from the word ratepayer to customer, because that's really what you are. So really at its core, what the CCA movement is about, and what I think is in very much part of what East Bay Community Energy is focused on, is giving local communities more control over the sources of their electricity. So in East Bay Community Energy's context, and in the other operating community choice aggregators around California, we have a board of local elected officials. Councilmember Kalb is one of our board members, and they, instead of having a state agency and privately owned investor utilities make resource decisions, it is the local board, the community, that have input into what the mix of energy is going to be. How much wind, how much solar, how much local solar versus solar that is not in the local community. Obviously understanding that, there are price sensitivities and, the ability of a CCA to really serve all of its customers is going to be largely based on its ability to compete with PG&E. So with those price sensitivities in considered, it really is the ability of the local government to make really important decisions about what the resources are going to look like and where investments are made in those resources. So at East Bay Community Energy, that the local development is a really critical piece of what we're building, and that I think is reflected in a number of ways. So we are not operating yet. Our goal is to launch in 2018 in a couple phases, but the way I look at local is it's a whole mix of different types of resources. It's not just local rooftop solar. Certainly there will be those opportunities, but it's investment in things like energy storage to improve the resiliency of our community and to allow us to offset peaking natural gas plants that really cause a lot of the local air pollution in the electric generation sector. It's investing in energy efficiency in our buildings and making investments in companies and in homes so that they are able to use energy during those times when there is abundant sun. The figure that we saw about very sunny from 9 to, here it's 9 to 5 instead of 10 to 3, but it's 9 to 5. Well, how do we start to match our usage of electricity to when we have abundant renewable energy instead of ramping up air conditioning when you get home, if you have air conditioning, at 5 o'clock, so the peak becomes 5 to 9. So it's making investments in our buildings and our homes to allow people to do things like automatically turn their air conditioner on during the day when there's a lot of when there's a lot of sun. So when you get home, your house is nice and comfortable, and you don't have to use as much during that period when the sun isn't shining and perhaps the wind hasn't really kicked in the later evening. And it's really this holistic approach to looking at local resources. It's investing in the built environment. It's certainly investing in generation. And I think really when I look at what East Bay Community Energy should be known for in the future, I really want us to be known as your transportation fuel provider. Because if we really think about the environmental benefits, whether they be local air quality or they be really the transformational opportunities, PG&E's energy mix is roughly 75% carbon-free today. There's definitely progress that needs to be made and more renewable, cleaner sources of zero-carbon electricity. We do have still the Diablo Canyon nuclear generating facility in the mix in PG&E service territory, but it's pretty clean. In California, the majority of our emissions, both local air quality emissions, but also greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. And so really, how does East Bay Community Energy kind of pivot to some degree from being just an electricity provider to really being a transportation fuel provider and really focusing on those local investments? Because I think that's where the most bang for the buck is going to be. That's the most transformational opportunity of what are we doing here that doesn't just improve our local environment, but can be replicated and scaled across California, across the country, across the world. And really is that transformation towards zero carbon, zero emission buses, heavy duty transportation, and cars. So when I think about the vision, it's really that transformation. Now, in the immediate period, next year when we're launching, are we going to be able to do all of that stuff? Probably not. All that stuff is expensive, especially some of the big infrastructure investments that we may want to make in things like electric vehicle charging or in large local solar plants or in big energy storage projects. But I think that's where the local bank does come into play. The ability to go to a financial institution that is mission-oriented and can access very low cost of capital and can look at what we have, which is 1.6 million Alameda County residents, 600,000 accounts, people who are going to pay their electric bills every month, and say, all right, we're going to finance a big investment in, say, charging, because we know those people are going to pay their bills. And that allows for sort of a confidence from our lenders that they want to do that, and because it's working in the context of a public bank, there's no profit that's added on there. So you really get to those extremely low 1-2% interest rates that start to make some of these investments a lot more interesting than they would be at 6, 7, 8% interest rates. I do think separately, as East Bay Community Energy grows and we sort of stand ourselves up and we build the necessary financial reserves that we need, and we go through the process of getting a credit rating and all this sort of stuff, we can also start to look at issuing bonds that will really reflect sort of the local community, right? So we, in a sense, become almost a de facto local bank, because we serve just Alameda County, and we are putting we are lending money to the benefit of Alameda County. Now that's very likely to be very focused on just the energy sector, but as we saw, that's a major area of focus for these Sparkassen banks as well. So I think that's really what I wanted to share is a little bit of the vision for East Bay Community Energy. I think hopefully you'll all be hearing a heck of a lot more about East Bay Community Energy over the coming months. Right now, I am still the only employee of East Bay Community Energy. I have hired one person, and we have a number of positions that are open, and we're looking to hire. So we're ramping quickly to get to a point early next year where we're going to be starting to bring on some customers and starting to be out there more publicly, sort of communicating our goals, communicating our message, and looking to engage with all of you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much. And as you mentioned the electric vehicles, I thought I should throw in a pitch that the Bay Area Air Quality Management District has grants available. And by the way, this is to everybody. There are grant funds available to pay to put in electric vehicle charging stations in commercial places, government places, apartment complexes. So hopefully maybe we can have some collaborative effort to get those out in partnership with, if you have your charging station and you have your solar power, then you have a solar-powered car. So.
Absolutely. I will just make one other pitch. So we will have a couple of products that we offer. One will be an opportunity to choose to be served by 100% renewable energy. And I really do hope that our cannabis industry in the county uniformly elects to opt up to 100% so that we have the greenest green.
Awesome. That's right. As it should be. That'll be a good slogan, like the greenest green, Oakland grown. Yeah. You know those T-shirts that they make about local business that says Oakland grown, right? So literally. Thank you for that. And I do want to say that the success of the ability of cities to come together to launch this community choice energy is really part of what inspired us around the notion of the public bank, and that the public bank could be not just Oakland, but a regional collaboration of multiple jurisdictions that would make it stronger by having it be a broader base and more potential sources of funding, as well as more jurisdictions participating in launching it would strengthen it. And we've really seen that with community choice energy. That, like, if Oakland had tried to launch that by ourselves, you don't get quite the economies of scale and the strength that you get having multiple jurisdictions together. So I'm very pleased to have been able to learn from that example as we are launching a feasibility study for not only an Oakland public bank, but a regional collaborative public bank. So thank you for that, and look forward to continuing. And to Councilmember Kalb, who's on that board, who I'm sure will be bringing us back lots of good stuff as it rolls out. And now that brings us to our next speaker, Gregory Rosen. Gregory Rosen is a 19-year renewables finance veteran who has developed and financed more than $400 million worth of residential, commercial, and utility solar projects. He started High Noon Advisors after 2 years at PowerHive Incorporated, where he financed and developed solar microgrids for unelectrified areas of Western Kenya. He was the first Chief Investment Officer at Mosaic and Vice President of Solar Finance at Union Bank. He's held various other positions in finance and investment banking, including several years at Powerlight and SunPower Corporations. Mr. Rosen holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Pennsylvania. Welcome.
Hi, good evening, everybody, and thanks to the other great panelists, and thanks for the organizers as well, and thanks for coming. I was asked to talk a little bit about the advantages of a public bank with respect to energy development. And I've been doing renewable energy development work for a long time, done a lot of projects here in the Bay Area, even see some fellow employees from years past, which is always fun. So I wanted to sort of focus on three main benefits that I see that a public bank could really bring to this area, or really to any area. I also have worked over the years with some of the German development banks, particularly KfW, which was referenced before. And I think really the first thing that could really help this area in Oakland is really the knowledge of the bank staff and the mission of the bank. So I've worked with a lot of banks, I've worked at a bank, and a lot of times banks are, it's sort of to their advantage to, unless they're really, really big, employ generalists. So even if you're a credit union, you maybe have folks that you want to work with, but you sort of have to know a little bit about everything. And it's really, really helpful when a bank can sort of afford or feel that they can invest in hiring specialists. Because those specialists they help to educate the senior executives at the bank. They also help to educate the investment committee, which is typically a subset of executives at a financial institution that make a decision about whether or not to make an investment. And a lot of times when investment committees are thinking about making investments, they are really in the back of their mind implicitly thinking about a risk premium and figuring out how risky is this deal. So if you don't have specialists and you don't have an educated investment committee and senior bankers, a lot of times people at those institutions will say, you know, it sounds really good, but we just don't really know enough. Or they might say, it sounds really good, and you know, we're going to charge you 12% or some rate that's much, much higher than an educated set of banking folks would give. So really, I would say having a knowledgeable banking staff really creates a virtuous cycle because the investors, the bankers would put a lower risk premium on the deal. And I'd say also it's because of local networks. So if bankers are in a community, they really are not... And bankers still need to make the effort to go out and listen to people in the community, but assuming that the public bank staff would do that, it really helps to understand what's going on, and that helps to lower some of the risk, and it also helps some of the bankers to become problem solvers. So it's very hard to solve risk issues around risk if you don't really understand what's going on in the community. And I have a sort of just an interesting aside. I've done most of my work in the United States, but I spent 2 years working in Africa, and there was some material for a solar project delivered to a site, and that material was stolen. And in the morning, when the workers came, some of the material was gone, and then in the afternoon, the material showed back up again. And there were people from the village, and they said, you know, we found your stuff, and they brought it back. And it's really a testament to when you are in touch with a community in general, and the community is bought in through education and through communication and through actually listening to what communities want, you really can help to mitigate risk, in this case, you know, the risk of theft. Another example I would give is that there are some state green banks. There's a green bank in New York called, not ironically, the New York Green Bank. There's also the Connecticut Green Bank, and there are a couple of other entities that are similar to that. And I did a deal when I was at Mosaic with the Connecticut Green Bank, and it was very interesting and it was very refreshing to be able to work with bankers. They understood solar because they had hired folks that had worked in the solar industry. And when it came time, we were looking to get a loan from them, and we were looking at negotiating the size of the loss reserve. And it was just very refreshing because after going back and forth and working iteratively, we were able to get a lower loss reserve because we were able to mitigate some of the risk by working cooperatively with the bankers. So it really does, it really would be a benefit to have that in this area. And I think it could, when you can help the entities that are developing projects and work with them to mitigate risk, it helps to make the investment safer, and that in turn lowers the interest rates. That brings me to my second point. The way that I would see a public bank rolling out is it doesn't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. I do want to say that there are a lot of very good, high-integrity institutions here in the Bay Area. There are a lot of knowledgeable folks. A lot of those institutions are actually nonprofit institutions. And I think that it could be very helpful as part of a rollout for a public bank is to sort of find out what's already going on and seeing how a public bank could help to facilitate more of the good things that are going on by some of those institutions. And that would cut across, you know, in my mind, it would be more than just renewable energy development. That could also extend to affordable housing and other things. And if you think about sort of the limited bandwidth that the staff at a public bank are going to have, it may make sense for a public bank to provide financial instruments that actually complement a loan, such as a loan guarantee, for example, rather than making the loan itself. The third point I want to make is just that a great thing about a public bank is instead of having the mission be sort of to make money by lending or providing services, there's really an opportunity to sort of turn the equation on its head and say that the mission is to serve communities, so let's go and listen to what communities need, and then let's structure the products around those community needs. And that's something that's very, very powerful. And I mean, I'm a big fan of credit unions. I'm a big fan of nonprofit investors. They don't always have the luxury of starting with that question. And that's something that I think could be very powerful and could help the Bay Area and Alameda County particularly continue to lead in some of the innovative things that it's doing, to really ask those questions and then really work with folks that have skills to craft smart solutions to make some of these good things happen, or more of these good things happen, that we'd all like to see. So all in all, and in conclusion, public bank really can help to create community wealth in a unique way that other existing institutions maybe aren't capable of, and particularly in disadvantaged areas. And I think in its own way, a bank could help people with different backgrounds and income levels actually come together to invest in the community for the common good, and in its own small way, really to help address past injustices to certain segments of the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and particularly, the importance on focusing on community needs. And I believe it was the Bank of North Dakota that's now gotten into the student loan business. Is that them? It was one of the others. Not that there are many public banks, but the community needs might not all be things that would be predicted ahead of time, but that you really want to have a structure that has community leadership, so that if, for example, there is, as there is now, a crisis in student loans, with them being so hard to get and so expensive, then a community-based institution could decide to work on student loans. And if certain neighborhoods are being redlined and excluded for, say, business startup loans in an area, then a community institution could focus on that. So I think it's really important that we think about not only what are the list of things that we could say right now today our community needs, but creating a structure that is responsive to different community needs as they arise over time. And thank you for sharing your thoughts. And now that brings us to Jessica. Jessica Tovar is a staff organizer for the local Clean Energy Alliance, and also the awesome t-shirt. After growing up in East Los Angeles, Jessica worked for over a decade as an environmental justice organizer in a variety of urban, rural, and indigenous communities throughout California and Arizona. Jessica interned with the Environmental Justice and Climate Change Initiative, working with organizations across the United States on issues of climate justice. In the Bay Area, she successfully mobilized against the expansion of the Chevron Richmond oil refinery. She currently, yes. She currently organizes for Clean Energy Solutions and has won a commitment to local clean energy development through Alameda County's East Bay Community Energy Program. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. So I'm very excited to be part of this panel and very excited to find myself in a place where we are working towards solutions to a lot of the problems in our community. I'm the coordinator of Alameda County-wide alliance known as the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. Who here has heard of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance before? Woohoo! And I work with the local Clean Energy Alliance as an organizer. And so one of the things that I just want to really emphasize on a personal level is that I do come from a community that was heavily burdened by pollution, heavily burdened by, climate pollution, and just the health of people around me, my own personal health, and then working with people who work at facilities that have compromised their health over time, and actually live by these facilities. So I just want to acknowledge that that is an injury, right? It's a burden on communities of color around the United States, around the Bay Area, certainly around the world, and we're seeing those impacts now. So one of the things that we really emphasize, East Bay Clean Power Alliance, and actually before East Bay Clean Power Alliance, there was a lot of efforts, Clean Energy Jobs, Oakland, and other efforts. We really have been working for the last 10 years on community choice energy. And it's a huge deal for us that we've come so far, is that there is now a program in the East Bay and that it is getting ready to launch next year. But one of the things I want to just emphasize are a lot of the goals. And I want to differentiate community choice, because we do see it as an opportunity. We don't see it as a solution in itself, but we want to use it as an opportunity to create and address solutions in our community because, you know, if you take a look at energy in this corporate form that we're familiar with, it's not been good. And so what we're trying to do is actively make it something that is actually good. So I just want to go over some of those goals and just kind of really emphasize what I've heard and what we're trying to do. So one of the things that we're critical of is that community choice energy often starts and is touted as a market-based kind of solution where they buy and sell energy off the market with two goals in mind. And the goal is to have cheap prices for electricity, and the other goal is to reduce greenhouse gas pollution, which is good. But we see that there's so much more that can be done. So we've really worked hard for other goals within our Alameda program, our East Bay Community Energy Program, excuse me. So one of those is particularly really the emphasis on the need for local development of clean energy. And let's be clear that wind and solar is the cleanest source of energy, and that's the type of build out we want to see in the East Bay. And one of the other things is, you know, the benefits is the creation of jobs in that sector, being able to build, own, and run that infrastructure here in our community. And that includes energy efficiency, because that is an opportunity also for jobs to actually retrofit current buildings, and perhaps in the future developments that we have in the East Bay, and actually do energy efficiency to those buildings as well. So the creation of good, clean energy jobs, and just to acknowledge that we've also been very critical of, you know, the clean energy jobs because they're often low paid and they're not long-term work. We have a lot of programs that train people to do this work, but we need to create more opportunities so that it is a norm. It is an everyday job for folks, and that it's family sustaining waged. And with community choice, because you are pooling different projects together, you have the opportunity to actually unionize work, because you need to have a certain amount of kilowatts in a project. Project has to be big enough in order to unionize it. So there's also that opportunity. Another thing too, when we pay PG&E for our electricity, that money is out the door into the investors. When you pay into an East Bay Community Energy Program, you're paying into a local county-wide program. And so that money circulates locally. So we want to see that wealth continue in our community, and our people that live, work, pray, play here actually benefit from that. Another one of our goals is to improve health and safety, and just realizing that when we do put into play actual true clean energy, that is less burden of pollution in our community, both at the local level and at the global level, right? As well as just improving the safety in our neighborhood, right? When you do these things, you know, improving the safety and having that assurance is important. And last but not least, one of the most very important goals that often gets overlooked time and time again in every campaign in our communities is having community in the decision making. And the only reason why our East Bay Community Energy Program is so unique is because of the active participation of the community, the environmental justice climate community, you know, the solar clean energy enthusiast community, as well as, you know, different, workforce development groups, the labor unions, and all these different sectors, churches that want to see clean energy actualized in our communities. So those are the goals of our program. They're very important to us. They have been adopted into the guiding documents of the East Bay Community Energy. And I have to say, you know, that was because of a lot of the work of the East Bay Clean Power Alliance. So we did get our commitment last fall to focus on local development of clean energy as well as community in the decision-making. And we're very proud. It's the first community choice energy program ever to adopt that from the very beginning. So that's something to be very proud of. Thank you. So I'd like to ask all of you, who here in the room lives in Alameda County right now? Okay. Any folks from Pleasanton, Newark? Okay, not right now. Okay. So yeah, right now it's all the cities except for Pleasanton, Newark, including the unincorporated that is part of the program. So one of the other things that I just want to address too is, you've mentioned, Wolfram, a lot about transition. And one of the things that we do talk a lot about is just transition in the context of workers, right? We don't want to put people completely out of work. We want to retrain them in this new clean energy sector. But I also like to use that same term to address the conditions of our communities, right? Specifically those that have been heavily burdened by environmental racism. And just acknowledge that, we want a just transition too. And the current structure that we have right now is if you have the money and you own your home, you can slap some solar and, tell your friend, hey, I'm doing what I can for the planet. Look, I got clean energy powering my home. But one of the things that's important to us is that, there are a lot of renters in Alameda County, a lot of low-income people of color who could benefit from clean energy too. And so, I grew up in public housing, and so one of the visions I have is having more of our public housing, powered by solar energy so that renters, low-income people, can also benefit from having, savings in their bill. Certainly through East Bay Community Energy, for sure, from what I've seen, every community choice has competitive prices. And so that is a huge thing. Another thing I want to share with you is, and maybe some of you have had the same experiences, if you were not able to pay your electricity bill, your power would go off. And who here has had the experience of being literally in the dark because you couldn't make ends meet to pay the bill? I know I've had that experience several times as a child, the daughter of a single mom, working several jobs and not being able to pay the bill. So one of the things we do envision is potentially creating a fund to keep the lights on for folks, for families in the East Bay. And I don't know the details about this, but I have learned that it's actually more expensive to shut off somebody's utility than it is to just keep it on. So I think through East Bay Community Energy, we have a lot of opportunities to do things differently, better, and actually make energy a good thing in our community. And one of the things that, we really believe heavily in is the active participation of the community that is exercising our energy democracy. And in this day and age, we need every form of democracy that we can to address issues in our community. So with that, I'm really hopeful. I'm really glad that we're addressing these issues because it is solutions-based. It is a foot in the right direction that'll benefit everybody and not have this model of leaving people literally in the darks while others can thrive. We need to change that. And I think the East Bay and California if we really are leaders, we really need to pay attention to this and do this as best we can. The idea of a public bank includes the concept of democracy and participation. I'm not an expert when it comes to money and banking necessarily, But I do acknowledge that in my community, there's been a lot of redlining, and a lot of people who aren't even able to do banking, instead have to go to corner cashing, check cashing places that literally steal the majority of your earnings just to cash your check. That's something we need to change in our community. And this predatory lending and stealing of homes, when I worked in Richmond, people who were mostly first-time home buyers out there lost their homes and had to go back to renting, oftentimes the same rental they had left before they bought their home, to an exacerbated rent because the renting was so flooded with folks trying to get back into, the rental housing system. So just to acknowledge, again, the gentrification, in all our communities, we really need to put people to work so they can afford to stay here and thrive here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that. It is incredibly important, and it is, I think, a point of great pride for many of us that in crafting the East Bay clean energy, the East Bay Community Choice Aggregation, we didn't just copy from exactly what others had done, but actually we're launching with a greater focus on local jobs and a greater focus on local community involvement and economic justice. And I love the idea that part of what we could do through this is make sure that people don't get their power cut off just because they're going through a hard time financially. And also, when we talk about the different things a public bank could do, check cashing is a great example of something that could have a huge community benefit. The amount of money that people lose going to these for-profit check cashing facilities and payday lenders, things like that, a public bank can also help provide alternatives to those in a way that that would help protect our community from essentially having whole chunks of their paychecks robbed, or what the Bible calls usury. I look forward to all the right-wing Republicans who like to quote the Bible on occasion, being willing to confront the big banks over their conduct of usury, which is a big, big sin in the Bible. I know we didn't warn you that tonight was Bible study, but... and so thank you so much. Let us give all of the panelists, again, a great round of applause and appreciation. Also, I'd like to give a big thank you to Laura on my staff, who has been working so hard on all of this. You can wave so everybody knows who you are. This is Laura on my staff. Thank you so much. And Sheng, also on my team, is in the room. Thank you, Sheng. And Kevin, is Kevin here? Okay. Also, we want to thank Friends of the Public Bank. Yes. And the local Clean Energy Alliance. Woohoo! And we don't have a ton of time left, but we did want to see if folks have questions. You can line up at this center mic if you have questions you want to ask publicly. Also, the panelists, if you don't all have to run right out, if somebody has a super detailed question that you want to ask a specific person, you can wait and hang out and come ask people. But if anybody has a burning desire to ask a public question of not great length, hey, Saeed, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Good.
Good to see you again.
Good seeing you. Hi. Thank you all for a great talk. My question has to do with sources of renewable energy, particularly for community choice aggregation. We hear a lot about solar energy and wind energy, but is there any talk or thought about biomass, which would be in essence turning trash that's generated locally into energy, which would have a multiple benefit at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Marin Clean Energy just signed a contract for a biogas project I believe it's at a landfill or wastewater treatment facility, actually, where they are taking the waste gas that would otherwise have been polluted, and that gas is actually much stronger than normal than normal greenhouse gases. Methane is hundreds of times more potent, and it's burning that for the purpose of electricity. So certainly, I think we have to think about all sources of renewable energy in our community. So yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
And I'll just add that there is some organic waste to green energy production already underway at East Bay Mud, the East Bay Municipal Utility District, which is our water and sewer government public utility, does have some production from food waste.
They have a lot of the good fuel there for that.
Yes.
So, we'll have to figure out how we get some of that stuff from them.
So it might be good to collaborate with East Bay Mud on this. Oh, and another thank you I want to give to on Dan Kalb's staff, Oliver, who's also worked on this at the back of the room. Big thank you. Excellent. Anybody else have a burning public kind of question? Bring it on.
So I just wanted to just emphasize, Local Clean Energy Alliance really wants to, I really want to make a distinction is that the more we build local clean energy infrastructure, wind and solar, the less we would need to actually use biomass and these other kind of what I call market-based or false solutions, because there's still, that's incineration. That's what it is. And the people that live by incinerating facilities already are burdened heavily by pollution, and that is just another source of energy with pollution. So I just want to acknowledge that. So again, the emphasis on more local build-out so that we're not relying on these types of sources of energy.
Thank you for that. And, don't underestimate how much we could do with solar. I mean, this was a good point, that with how much Germany is doing, and they have significantly less hours of sun per day than we do here in California. And so, we can accomplish quite a lot with solar, and I think there's some hope for advancements in battery technology, which will also contribute to being able to balance the loads, with over time with more solar as well. All right.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Greetings, my name is Troy Massey, and I just want to share a quote that I kept with me for quite some time until I see something like this happen in the community. And it's from Ivan Illich's Energy and Equity, the questions of energy from back in the 1970s. It says that the widespread belief that clean and abundant energy is the panacea for social ills is due to a political fallacy, according to which equity and energy consumption can be indefinitely correlated, at least under some ideal political conditions. Now, considering this is the 1970s, he's putting it out there and letting people know this is something we need to be focusing on. I don't think that we have a full understanding of the realities of what is necessary to have the abundant energy that we need to co-create a lot of the things that we're doing in society today, and to the advances that people are dreaming of at Cal State University and what other people are dreaming here. But I would like to see us actually take more of an ecological approach, ecologically sustainable, not energy sustainable, not just institutions of power and creating power and electricity, but ecologically sustainable approaches to this stuff. Because I think the technological fix is going to cause a lot of problems for us in the future if we're not careful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think the point is well taken, and this is something we talk about in the transportation world as well, which I work in a lot, which is it's not just going to be enough for people to drive greener cars. We're going to have to actually drive a lot less. And so I think that that is an excellent point. And I want to make clear that just because tonight we organized specifically to talk about clean energy, but I want to fully acknowledge that it's not just how to create more megawatts, it's also how to create more negawatts, which means negative watts. In other words, we are going to have to actually use less electricity. And when we talk about the gap of, well, you can get this much from solar and this much from wind, but current demand is here. Well, some of how we're going to fix that is going to be more solar and more wind, but that's not going to be all of it. I also think, you know, people are going to have to, in many cases, if they can, get over using air conditioners. I mean, and, you know, and in terms of transportation, you know, we're going to have to walk and bike. So it's not just going to be new technologies to make energy. It's also going to be conservation and saving and insulation. And so just because, you know, tonight's was focused on this, I want to make clear that the other things need to be on the table too. And I know for many of us, they really are. And so this now we have running out of our time on the room, so we're going to stop the formal with the microphones and stuff thing so that the folks who do all those systems can start preparing to go home. But the panelists, if you don't mind, are going to stick around for a little bit. And so do feel free to come ask if you have specific questions on particular topics. Also, I want to encourage, there are going to be more votes on these issues. While we passed the public bank feasibility study funding approval, we're not done. This is going to come back to the City Council. It's going to require further action. If you're not yet on our email list, please get on our email list. And you can see Laura, who's standing over there, if you need to get on our email list, or sign the sign-in sheet from here and check that you want to get on our email list, because we will send out announcements about future meetings so that we can make sure that both the public bank happens and that whatever else we may need to fight for with regard to the energy, though the basic approval is in, but there's going to be future steps and future things to push for. We'll make sure to come back and continue to advocate for those votes. And I want to say thank you all so much for coming. It's okay, we'll stick around and take, you have a brief announcement?
No, it's not an announcement. I did have a question that I think is of general interest for Mr. Morales, and that is, how should we interpret the sort of the phasing out of the feed-in tariff that I think began in January in Germany? How should we view this? What is behind it? And what should we, proponents of renewable energy, how should we view this as a threat or what? Can you please elaborate?
This is a very good question, because it is a problem of politics. As a lot of Germans are afraid about the situation that they have to pay a part with their monthly bill, this 8 cents that I mentioned. They have protested a lot against this because it is money. And the reaction of our government was to reduce all this, and what you had said just now. And that's why my comment was that some of our scientists are warning that if this policy is going on, we will never reach our own goals, because this is counterproductive. This is the situation. That is only politics in reaction of the mood of the population. Yeah.
Thank you for that, and let us not forget that all of these efforts that have been successful in various places have been successful because people kept pushing for them. And sometimes even when you think you've pushed for it and you've succeeded, you're still going to have to keep pushing for it. And so as that's true there, that's true here too, that an engaged citizenry is going to be needed for all of these steps. Thank you all so very much.
Yep.
Thank you for being here. Oh, can we have
certainly need your help.
Can we have the panelists stand together for a moment for a little